Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours, the WWDC edition, part 2. So we started this. We started this on Monday, where we all looked at we watched the all the festivities, and then we kind of worked through some of the ideas of what that all meant. Now we're Thursday. We have a little perspective. We've been watching videos. We've been reading PDFs, and trying to figure out what this all means. And so we're going to talk about it a little bit more today. Just remember that this is remember that this is a question and answer session. So if you're watching here in Mukana, if you're watching from our site, you'll see that there's an opportunity to ask questions there and vote on those questions. That's what we're going to talk about. If you stop asking questions, we'll talk for a little while longer, and then it'll be a shorter show. So it's really important for you to throw those questions in and vote those questions up or down, so that we know what you'd like us to talk about as it relates to this. We don't have the structure that we had before because we kind of knew what we wanted to talk about, but there's so many things that we could talk about now that we're leaving it kind of wide open for you. So just throw those questions in and vote those questions up and down, and we'll go from there. We've got Andy Anako from, so Andy, I always want to say the Chicago Sun-Times, but it's not the Chicago Sun-Times. You're really, it's Mac Break, and obviously WGBH as well. Is that correct, Andy?
I've got a small problem in that I'm getting in Zoom. I'm hearing two different streams here, and so I'm also hearing what you said like a minute ago. So this is like that comedy sketch where someone's taking questions from last week.
You probably
have to mute Mukana.
Yeah, just mute Mukana or turn it off. that you could just close that window, and then you'd be able to.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Hear one of us.
Yeah. Hey, we were all young and foolish once, weren't we?
So anyway, Andy, it's good to see you here.
There you
go. Andy and I, of course, hang out on Mac Break almost every week, and sometimes when we're in the same place, we hang out together. So anyway, it's good to have you here, Andy. We also have.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, now we got you.
There we go. So we also have Chris Demiris from LumaTouch. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about LumaTouch and how this all got started? And
the interesting thing about LumaTouch is it really started a long time ago. It started back in 1993, actually.
1993? You've been developing for the iPad since 1993? How is that possible?
Not quite, but the whole foundation of it did. That's when I started my first company, which was Hollywood Effects. For those around long enough, probably remember the cheesy 3D effects that we had rendering that was a lot of fun on the Amiga computer and then on Windows. And we sold that to Pinnacle in 2000 and worked for Pinnacle and then Avid. Then Avid sold us off to Corel, and it's a long story from there. And that's what. But Terry Morgan and I, my partner Terry Morgan, met at Avid and worked together. Really loved working on Avid Studio for iPad, and really had some great ideas for something that we could make even better. So in 2013, we started LumaTouch and started from square one developing, LumaFusion using all the best technologies that Apple had to offer, and creating something new and interesting. And it's really taken off, and it's been a lot of fun, and we've grown a nice little company from it. And we're, really excited. And, Apple has shown us a lot of love with the Spring Forward event. They featured LumaFusion quite substantially on the iPad Pro. And we just continue to keep adding new features and try to make it the most powerful editor on the planet, not just, on mobile.
And tell us a little about it. So LumaFusion is basically it's a full blown. I mean, I've used it in the field as well. It's a full blown video editor, but right now on the iPad, right?
That's correct. Yeah, it's on iPad and even on iPhone. We have groups at the BBC, for example, who shoot and edit right off their iPhones, ready for broadcasts and on the web. But personally, I think it runs better on the iPad. You need that space for editing. But yeah, it's a full multi-track editor. Has most of the features you'd need as a professional. Now, obviously, because it's on the iPad, there are some limitations. We don't have video plugins, though we are adding back in audio plugins. But we're adding lots of new features that'll be coming up this summer, including full multicam workflow, captioning workflow, basically filling in all the gaps so that users can do, right now I'd say 80% of videos can be created in LumaFusion, but for the other 20%, we have an export to FCP XML, so you can continue there. And we're hoping to slowly get to a point where people don't ever need to go out of LumaFusion if they don't want to.
That's fantastic. And I think that LumaFusion, it really pushes the iPad farther than most of the apps that are out there. Another app that's pushing, or another framework that's pushing the iPad forward, is Audio Toolkit Pro, and we have Ari Prohaska here to talk about that. Ari, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And the sorry, we have a little technical issue there. Let's go to the full screens if we can, guys. Anyway, so Ari, tell us a little bit about. Sorry, one second here. We'll just see if we can just go to full screens if we can. I'm trying to figure out why looks like we're on a downstream key there. There we go. Anyway, so Ari, tell us a little bit about Audio Toolkit Pro.
All right, so it's actually Audio Kit. Audio Toolkit. So
I'm sorry. I always think of it as Toolkit because the reason I think of it as Toolkit is because you are bringing a framework that a lot of other people can build on, and so it's always in my head as Audio Toolkit, but Audio Kit Pro, and you're the founder of that framework. Is that right?
Yeah. So the framework is just called Audio Kit. I'm the founder of that open source framework for doing audio synthesis, processing, and analysis. And it tries to fill in the gap for audio programmers or people who need audio in their app, where when AV Foundation stops being enough, or they want to be more creative with some underlying DSP, rather than just playing back like audio files or something. As founder of AudioKit, I write a lot of the code. I deal with bugs and onboarding new people, write documentation. We have a full test suite, and I write playgrounds and examples, that sort of thing. Now, AudioKit Pro, that's a company that uses AudioKit, the framework, to release apps. And in that, I co-wrote with Matt Fetcher, this synth that everyone knows about called AudioKit Synth 1. It's probably the biggest synth that's ever been on the iPad. It's free and also open source. And then Digital D1 and Hey Metronome and a few other AudioKit Pro apps that we've released recently. So that's a pretty good background for me.
It's great. I just think that a lot of the apps that you're building are just so much fun. Like I feel like I can. I when I first threw one of the apps into my iPad, I remember I got on a plane for, it was like a 7-hour flight, and I looked down. And then I looked up and we had landed. And I had just been sitting there playing with music and really building that out. It was really a great experience. And I just love what you're doing as far as making it available to everyone else as well.
Well, thanks. That really came through when you reviewed it and showed it on some of your programs, that you're really so enthusiastic. And that's exactly what we hope for when we release software. We hope that people get joy out of it. Yeah.
It's and I think that it's one of the first apps that I've seen for music where I didn't need to do anything with it. like you could, but I could just do it for fun. And just play with it and play with the sounds and play with the music. And then I knew that I had the tools there to actually do something with it as well. And so it was just really, really a lot of fun. So anyway, so it's great.
Definitely have that design paradigm of making it easy to use first and then deep afterwards.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Also here, Jason Beisch from Office Hours. Jason is one of our regulars, and we had invited everybody. Jason said, "Yeah, I'm ready to jump on here." And
of course, I'll do it.
Yeah, Jason, what do you, just giving people a little bit of a framework? What do you mostly work on?
Let's see. I started a company called Nerds Limited in 2009 instead of getting a job, and it was both the scariest and probably the most fun thing I've ever done in my life. And at this point, I have maybe 800 clients and probably 800 different tasks. I have one publicly facing published app called Legal Flyer that creates property releases for drone pilots. The rest of them are corporate and not available publicly. But I've got to say, this is quite a panel. You guys are great.
It's great. So now we're going to go ahead and jump into the questions. So once again, if you're watching and you have questions, go ahead and ask those questions, and also vote those questions up and down, because that's going to tell us what you'd like to cover as we go forward. So let's go ahead, and the first question we have here coming in from Alex Forty Golner. He said, if you could define a new flavor of ProRes, what features would you have in it? Go ahead, Jason.
Without question, I would say something that has an alpha channel that isn't the maximum bit rate.
Right. Being able to have an out, because you're really stuck with 444 if you want to do that, or even some kind of dependency layer that you'd be able to build selections for. I think that the hard part with that is that the transport becomes more complicated. Chris, did you from a video editing perspective, is there anything that you'd like to see?
Well, honestly, for me, it just comes down to we'd like to see any flavors of ProRes coming over to the iPad. Honestly, that's all it comes down to. Even the current, lower end flavors would really make a difference in users being able to edit more easily on there. So I don't really have an idea of what we want new in there. Just we want it on all the platforms.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part is anything we'd want to add. Like I know for me, I'd want to. I want object layers. I want my QuickTime. I want my QuickTime back. So I think that's the big challenge. Andy, is there anything that you can think of that you would like to see in Apple ProRes?
Probably just greater accessibility across all platforms. It was kind of disappointing to me that when I was first trying to use the iPad Pro as a camera, how difficult it is to get at all that wonderful information that those nice Pro cameras are spitting out. I just assumed that just like on other phone cameras that I have from other makers, you flip a switch, you get everything if you want it. So we just need more transportability, more accessibility.
Alex Folder-Goldner also asks, Quartz Composer used to be the basis of Apple OS UI simulation and implementation. It is, at its core, an OpenGL node connection system. It has been depreciated by Apple since 2019. Any mentions of Quartz Composer or metal-based successor? Has anyone seen anything that looked like that? I don't think that they're...
No, I haven't seen all the videos, but I haven't seen anything even close to that.
Yeah, so we built a lot on it. It's a really fun, it was a really fun app that Apple had purchased and was very useful for a long time. So it's, we haven't seen that. I think that there's a lot to be said for nodal programming, or nodal development, and so it's so hopefully we'll see more of that.
Yeah, under the hood, Core Image is effectively a nodal, workflow. And so if somebody were to create a good user interface for that, along with SceneKit and Metal, there's a lot that could be done there combining those, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as we talk about that, I know that one of the things that we started to dig into is spatial audio on Monday. Did anyone get to play with a little bit more of the spatial audio rollout? Ari, did you get a chance to look at any of that support that's out there?
I actually did not. We did implement 3D audio in the previous way in AudioKit, but it was never very good. So I still don't necessarily think of the spatial audio as very much like an audio art type of framework. It's more like making your Zoom calls sound better and things like that. But yeah, it didn't intrigue me enough to dig deeper.
The only reason I ask is that I think that synthesizers lend themselves in a lot of ways to wanting to put them into that space, and so as you start to think about that music, and I know that a lot of times when you talk to folks that are, for instance, doing modular synthesis, a lot of those aren't in that many channels, and so it's one of those things where software might be able to do that more effectively as far as moving stuff out. And I will admit that I spend a lot of time in spatial audio, so I think about it a lot and I listen to it a lot, and it's hard for me to go back. So that's for me, everything kind of has become over the last year has gone from thinking spatial audio was something odd and interesting to something that I expect to have. So
on the last call or the last office hours, you even said that you thought spatial audio would be like 10 times more important than from mono to stereo. And I saw that, I listened to that, I'm like, what? That's crazy. But I think if that's going to be true, you're going to have like the Beatles of spatial audio and like people like artists that really push it forward. I don't think it's going to necessarily be 10 times the effect if it doesn't get some creative people involved.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that I as I've talked about a little bit in the past, is I think that we're really in that wax cylinder level of where we are with it right now. One of the things about that I look at as far as spatial audio goes is that, we're seeing all the back catalogs getting pushed forward, especially because Apple put it forward. So now you have Warner Brothers and Universal and other folks that are all kind of building up that, getting that, pushing that back out. And so, so we're going to see. We've already seen when you talk about the Beatles. Here Comes the Sun is actually a pretty good rendition in spatial. So they've gone back to some of those and been able to grab those. And so I think that at least the people we're talking to don't think that they're going to release a lot of new. It's going to be because Apple's so big in this industry that it seems like it's going to be a important piece of people's release schedules. To have it highlighted. So it'll be interesting. It's been, to your point, it's been this niche market for a long, long time. But I think that it'll be interesting to see how that goes forward. A question from Mason Lancaster from Pasadena. He said, "Are there any indications so far in the iPad OS as to the amazing power and memory of the latest iPad Pros? What all that memory is for? Does anyone have a sense of looking into that?" Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I mean, this is the most tertiary of guesses, but I'm assuming it's designed to pick up the retina tax. Anytime you plug it into a 6K display, the massive amount of computing power required to do seamless transitions is going to be something along those lines, and then to implement massive storage.
It seems like for yeah. Go ahead, Chris. It seems like
I was just going to say I think another big part of it is simply the creating a platform that they can use across all of the different devices, that makes it easier for them to optimize, for them to write software for. They don't have to segment across those, for the lower level libraries. And so honestly, I think that's a big part of it, just making it simpler for production.
Do you find that power has been something that's been problematic, Ari, from a developer's perspective in the past?
I actually got the iPad Pro a week before WWDC because I assumed that we were going to get Xcode for iPad. Yeah. Even the announcement was, the first one was away we code. And I thought, oh, yeah, that means away from our main computer or something. And I was kind of disappointed with the Swift Playgrounds because I think that doesn't actually require that much power. On the other hand, I think part of the promise of programming on the iPad is it's accessible to more people. And if it's only going to work on like the $1,500 M1 iPad Pro, then that's not mission accomplished. That's still just a very expensive computer to have to program on. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm even keeping this iPad Pro or waiting till they actually give me something that I can use that power for. But no, I don't think the iPad needs this much power for the stuff that I build for it anyway.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Yeah,
go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, you keep in mind that the M1 processor isn't so much a absolutely brand new, completely reinvented CPU. It really is the top level iPhone CPU that's had a bunch of stuff added to it. So really, there's not. So this is a lot of stuff it's inheriting kind of for free. But in terms of things that I've been seeing at WWDC, there have been a lot of sessions just all about making multitasking run a lot more smoothly, to be able to manage things between two apps, be able to drag between two apps. And I think that at the very least, that's what the memory is for, to handle that a lot better. If you've been using iPads for a long time, you're kind of used to the fact that a lot of the multitasking that the iPad does and iPad OS is kind of an illusion. It just basically freezes and parks an app. And then when you try to tab back, you're not right back into it. You have to give the OS time to say, oh, I'm sure I put that data somewhere. No, I got it. Oh yeah, white suit, left-hand pocket. There you go. There's your game app. So yeah, but I concur. I wasn't betting on Xcode for iPad, but that would have been the killer thing that said this is why. I was looking for that one sledgehammer thing that said this is why this is why the M1 processor on iPad changes everything. Now it's not that difficult for us to do Xcode on iPad. And it's not going to be appropriate for everything, but hey, at least now you can take your projects in and do either limited projects or take modules of your projects and do that. But so I think it's basically parity across the line more than, hey, now you can run Mac apps, window and picture in picture inside your iPad.
Right, Chris, you were going to say something.
Yeah, so I think towards that point there, they're two very different platforms, and the main difference is touch, and that's what we've built LumaFusion on, is being in touch with your media, and that's so different. And bringing a desktop app over to the iPad is not going to be a simple thing. And I think Apple does things in steps. So the Playgrounds is that first step, and I think it will get there. It's just going to be a much longer time. One other little thing I want to mention about the new iPad Pro that I think in the long run is a big deal is the Thunderbolt port. It definitely, for our users, particularly who, have always had a problem with storage, we're allowing direct editing off of these Thunderbolt drives, and it does have better performance. We've not as much as I'd hope, but I have a feeling that's going to, continue to improve as well. And just makes it easier to edit more tracks off of an external drive.
Have we seen any rumors of any kind of video input device from that Thunderbolt connection? Yeah, no comment. No, go ahead, Jason.
I have played around with plugging in the Web Presenter HD, and haven't found an app to instantiate it yet, but it's in there.
There's a bunch of us that's what we're looking for is to be able to digitize into the iPad itself. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, that's for me. I'm not doing the sort of content creation you guys are doing, but the ability to plug in just an external 1080 webcam and be able to do an entire streaming platform just inside this little purse that I like to carry around when I go to New York for the day, that would be transformative. That would justify a lot of the expense of the iPad Pro for me. I'd be surprised if we don't see it soon, I hope.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Steve from Chicago said, interested in the password-free tech preview. How do you envision this playing out? Does anyone? Go ahead, Jason.
I'm guessing it's going to roll out, very carefully. And as with anything that's password related, it's certainly better than nothing. It's not a password manager, but it's certainly better than nothing. So to that end, I think they're going to do it very carefully at first and then kind of step it a little bit more and more and more and so on.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I agree. This is why they were very, very careful to say that we're just experimenting with this. We're giving it to developers so you can break it on your own terms before we start breaking it on people's actual devices. This is part of, I'm seeing a trend in Apple, especially in 2021, of them saying we don't even necessarily want you to trust other companies' security. We want you to trust the security tools that we are giving you. So don't necessarily subscribe to a third-party VPN. Use our iCloud Plus service, even though it's not necessarily the same thing. Don't trust another authenticator. We will give you an authenticator here. And if they're trying to give you device-based authentication, don't necessarily trust that. We can give that to you on our devices, and you all trust it within the Apple umbrella, which is in one way is really, really good for users because there's probably no $2 trillion company I trust with personal security more than Apple. But nonetheless, It means that, hey, Samsung has just come out with this phone that's absolutely perfectly within. This is the dream phone ever. But wow, now there's 11 things I would have to change and learn to trust if I switched off of Apple. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I was just talking trash. I'm not going to switch from Apple. Please don't turn off access to all my stuff.
And I will admit that the ecosystem is definitely a lock-in overall. I know for me, I am I don't look at other phones. I don't look at any other phones, just because I know I just turn away, but the issue is that the idea of switching out of the ecosystem becomes so cumbersome, so for instance, I haven't had anything connected to my TV except for an Apple TV for a decade, and so the thing is I've got, I don't know, 600 movies on there, and I've got all this other stuff all wound up into it, and I've got all my passwords wound in, and so the idea, like when someone comes out with some other product, I don't really take it seriously, other than let's see what the features are that I wish I had on my thing, because I'm not going anywhere, it's and as a user, I'm probably not that odd, for a lot of users, it's just a path of least resistance. Anyway, let's jump to the next question here. Talak Miguel Lopez Waterman from New York says, what has been the number one disappointment this week, with the exception of no hardware releases? Go ahead, Jason.
I'm going to push back against that. I like the idea that there was no hardware released, because that deserves its own event, which deserves its own coverage. Completely separate. So I don't know. When I get through all the videos, I'll tell you. Is
there anything? Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Just quickly, I think we talked about this even a second ago. I would have loved to have seen more aggressive explanation of, now here's part of the rewards you're getting from the M1 processor across the platform. Here's something that macOS is going to be able to do that we weren't able to do previously. I realize they already sold this. They're already doing this very, very well. But I would have loved to seen in some of the videos, here was something that you didn't expect that is now super, super easy to do on iPad OS or on macOS that was not easy to do before. All the stuff that's unique to the M1 that seemed to come out were mostly due to the presence of the neural engine chip, not due to the presence of M1 instead of Intel.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, and along those lines, I would have liked to have heard something along the lines of, those eGPUs you spent a whole lot of money on, we're going to give those back to you and show you why you don't need them instead of just cutting them out entirely.
Good. Ari?
Yeah, I'm just going to second what I said before. No Xcode and also just Swift Playgrounds later this year. That was kind of a disappointment too, because I really would have loved to take the excitement of WWDC and start using them. And I also want to second what Jason said. I consider this the developers conference. And if there's too much stuff that is just like exciting for the consumer, I don't think that's what this purpose of this conference is for. I remember in your first office hours, one of the participants who's more of a consumer said they were excited to see the release of data on somebody's death. And I was like, that's not something to really be excited about for a release. Right, yeah. But yeah, the developer stuff has been great, and I couldn't ask for more except for Swift Playgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a lot of really some slick stuff that slid out. You know, like so the object capture, which I think we have some questions for in the future here, but we'll jump into that. Another one that Apple released that I think has been around for a little while, but we now have available to us is called the Advanced Video Quality Tool. So if you guys haven't seen the AVQT, that is a super useful tool that you probably haven't heard of if you haven't. So I would highly recommend downloading that tool. It's a command line tool that it basically analyzes. You basically put in your source footage and then you put in the compressed footage, and it gives you numeric values to tell you basically what the delta between those. There's a bunch of us that have done lots of other ways of doing that, doing difference keys and all kinds of other stuff, but that's all visual. We just look at it and go, oh, I see that. This actually breaks it all down and really gives you the quantifiable solution for it. And those are little things that you see kind of leak out that in things like object capture. Chris, is there anything that you wished you had seen more of?
Well, first of all, ProRes was one of them. I was really hoping to see ProRes on iOS. But a number of the new technologies they announced were Mac OS only, which I was surprised by, things like the new captioning code that they provided, and some of the EDR specifics, for their high dynamic range pipeline that they've got were only Mac OS. So that was a little disappointing. But the AVQT was really exciting. Both I can see for how it would be for you, but for us, it's from a testing standpoint. We already use differences, to make sure that, our rendering pipeline doesn't change, but we haven't done any testing on compressed video versus the original. And that's going to be really exciting in our automated test to make sure we don't, have any regressions.
Yeah, so as I work on compression, what I've done in the past without that tool is you just, as you said, for the listeners who don't understand how you would use that, is you take your original footage, you put some time code on it so you know exactly what frame you're in, and you render it out. And you grab those frames. A lot of times I'll just render out HLS and then go and grab some segments. What I just did, throw them on top of that original inside of my editing app, and you set it to difference, so it's black where it's zero difference, right? And then white where it's totally different. And I will warn you that you're better off using this tool than seeing that, because once you turn that on, you can never unsee macro blocking. Like you just see macro blocking everywhere. Like it just becomes, in fact, I almost see it in nature. Like I walk out in my backyard and I'm like, I think that tree is macro blocking a little bit. So anyway, yeah. So it's that's what we've done in the past, and it's been imperfect in the sense of you don't really know. And it's a really great little tool. Chris, Kostelic says, for LumaFusion, are there any dock hard drive combos best or worst for the new M1 iPad?
So we're currently doing some testing on that, and I don't have a definitive answer at the moment, but we will put out a FAQ of those. So far, we're finding a few problems with some of the docks, that they are hurting performance. And so direct drive connections, like, one of my favorite drives is the little Samsung T7, gives really good performance for the money. And so that's been good, but we will keep testing that and come out with a FAQ about that.
And does the T7 work well for a long period of time? Like if you're editing for a couple hours?
Good question. I always test it on a more limited basis, so I'll have to check with our QA group. And
not that I might be bitter. So anyway, I'm just saying. Go ahead, Jason. The T5, by the way, is great, but the T7 we've had some issues with. They heat up and then they slow down a lot. So anyway, go ahead, Jason.
I've had great luck with the OWC Envoy Pro EX or ES, I think. It's fantastically fast.
Another question for Luma Fusion, Luma FX. So Jan Landy said, what is the concept of Luma FX, and why would I use it rather than just Luma Fusion?
So Luma FX was sort of the precursor to Luma Fusion. It's available on the App Store for just 99 cents. And it is really just what you get if you go into the clip editor in Luma Fusion. It's all the effects, the being able to reverse the video, change speed, do all those things. But it was just designed for somebody who wants to just grab one clip out of photos, do some cool effects on it, and put it out. But for any editing that you want to do, use Luma Fusion, and it includes everything that Luma FX has. So
that's great. Neil Avelado says spatial audio and Dolby Atmos is supported on capable third-party devices. Any examples of them? Makes and models. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Spatial audio is really easy. At this point, AirPods Pro and what are they called? AirPods.
Well, and we have to remember that
ones.
I think that a lot of people think that, oh, you have to have the AirPods or the AirPod Maxes or whatever. Remember that for the music side of it, it's every headphone. You know, it's just folding that down into binaural.
Yes, I know. But
so yeah, but for the movies, if you're watching a movie, then and you need to be able to have it in place, like so that it stays there. As someone who does streaming, who's streamed in spatial, when I first started testing it, I put the AirPods in. It was the first time I tested it. We have a room in the office. I don't have a room, but we have a room in the office that has 514, and so I usually listen to everything there because we're testing stuff, and then I put the AirPods on to test them, and I turned like this, and I was like, "Oh no, we have too much on the right, too much audio on the right." And I turned this way, "Oh no!" And I was like, "It's phasing back and forth," and I started panicking, and then I realized it was just the headphones. Go ahead, Andy.
I just want to say that I will kick in the first $10 towards the production budget for Alex or anybody else to do. Remember, like when stereo first came out, like in the 1950s, and all these demo tapes were, well, here I am at the bowling alley, line them up, folks, and then they bowl and there's a strike, and then, hey, wow, but wait a minute, look at the other room. Let's go into the other room where they're playing ping pong. Pook, pook, pook,
Yeah.
pook, pook. I really want to see one of those really cheesy demos in spatial audio.
Cheesy, yeah.
Because it's nice to be able to check out these music tracks and other things that are mixed for these sort of things, but sometimes you need that blatant. The thing that's been, I'll just say that the thing that's been sort of throwing me off is that, again, it's nice to talk about how I got Dolby Atmos, I've got these $500 headphones, whatever. I want to know that, again, if I'm using like your basic USB-C earbuds, is it going to sound any better or any sort of a better experience? Yeah. And again, I'll give you $10. I'll kick in $10 towards that production.
So the first thing that I would say is that, and this wasn't around when we talked about it on Monday, or it might have been, but I didn't see it. In the spatial audio inside of Apple's in Apple Music, there is a Zane Lowe does a this is spatial audio, and he steps you through. Here is Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. Here's the mono. Here's the stereo. Here's the spatial. And I feel like I can really, I mean, at least in my headphones, I haven't tried I can hear it, and you can, and what I've noticed, so after that, I got really excited about that. It's probably the best description with the ultimate Apple burn. So when Apple burns something, it's so subtle, like it's always like this little thing that goes, and the stereo sounds great because that's what we've always listened to. It's so good. It's so little, but because that's what we've always had, and so, but anyway.
You people who use the pack-in headphones, you're just so adorable.
I just loved it. I just love the burn. Anyway, so I listened to it, the headphones, and then I spent a couple hours listening to all the lists. My kids and I sat, again, my living room's got a 7.1, so I'm able to kind of play it out there. And what was interesting is what we're going to see now is, that when every new technology starts, whether it's railroads or whether it was something else, everybody went a whole bunch of different ways. Film had 18 frames a second and 27 frames a second and 24 frames a second. And they all kind of coalesced over time, but there was all this experimentation on how to do it. And right now, when you listen to the tracks, you'll hear there's some that are just done. You can tell the person has done this a lot. So if you listen to Kenny Rogers, The Gambler, or Bryan Adams, Summer of '69, what you hear is someone who has done this a lot. And they're not trying to show off. They're just like, I'm just going to put all the instruments in a nice place for you to listen to them. Whereas Rush, Tom Sawyer comes on and wow, it just fills up the whole room. It's just like the instruments are unbelievable. Like I have never heard anything fill up my room so much as Tom Sawyer. except for the fact that they put Getty in the left right instead of the center, and your head goes, oh, I don't understand. You're like I don't. It sounds a little ghosty, for that. And so that's someone who really was taking full advantage of it and got really excited and said, okay, now I'm going to put this. And I've talked to some people who love that, and a lot of people that don't. But I think that we're seeing. I'm going to try to build a playlist soon of like these are the ones that, as someone who does spatial all the time, these are the ones that I think are the 10 that you should probably listen to hear it, because the 100 that are there's about 60 that I wouldn't have put up there. I would have been like, ooh, I don't think I would show that. Go ahead, Jason.
And I would love to see like La Villa Strongato or the rhythm method from A Show of Hands from Rush. That would be fantastic. And Andy, to your point, I would say all they need to do is pay Children's Television Workshop to have Grover go near,
around,
far,
over and under and through. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the my big one that I want to see mastered is Oranges and Lemons by XTC, because it's such a complex album that I'd love to see that kind of get pulled out into space. Jan Landy has another question about LumaFusion. When you design LumaFusion and its upgrades, how much importance do you give the Apple Pencil? Do you interact with the pencil that much, Chris?
Well, I don't, but our director of QA uses the pencil almost exclusively to do editing, and so he's a big fan. And so we haven't done anything to break the pencil, but we haven't used it to its fullest extent in LumaFusion. Now we do have plans for that in the future, and so in addition to some more advanced things like masking and rotoscoping that would really take advantage of it, just in the title editor for quickly jotting text and grabbing that, we have a lot of little plans for it as well. So we are thinking about it, but it's not something that's had a lot of attention up till now.
Ari, is the pencil something that affects what you're doing? Have you guys played with that very much?
I haven't done that much with it. I have this dream to make an app called Audio Kid, which would be like a synth for kids, and they would use the pencil as an interface. But someone else can steal that idea from this broadcast, because I haven't done it for 2 years now, so it's up to them to do it.
There was an app in the 90s, and I just can't think of the name of it right now, that would convert audio to images. Like, so it would package that much like a spectrogram, but it would convert it to an image. You could edit the image and then push it back into sound. And when I first saw the pencil and I saw a spectrogram, I was like, oh my gosh, if I could just, because it was an amazing thing. It was really easy it was mostly effects. People who do sound effects were using it. And I think it just went away at some point, but it seemed like that merging of imagery and being able to have something that represents all the sound that you had there and then being able to edit it and put it back. And you see a little of that inside of some of the Adobe products, but
would the pencil really help that much more than a finger for something like that? I mean, that's the main thing with the pencil. Like, is the precision really that important?
I find that the issue that I have in general with, like, for instance, OmniGraffle is a good example of an app that I love and I spend an inordinate amount of time in. And so I would love to say, I used to work on Star Wars, and now I spend most of my time in OmniGraffle and Keynote and Numbers. Like those are my three big apps. And so anyway, I think that, like, the touch interface for that doesn't work for me, and the same thing with Keynote. Like, the touch process doesn't, like, I love drawing. Like, this is a good example. I've talked about this before, but I draw in Keynote. I draw all my slides really quickly, and I just sketch them all out. Then I bring them all into my computer, and I build them all, and then I present them for my iPad. But the building part where I'm dragging things around, my fingers don't seem to, or at least the way the interface works doesn't seem to work. Like, it's just not, there's not enough fine control. And I forced myself to do a lot of these things with only that, just to see how it would work and see if it would take, and it just hasn't taken yet. I'm working on it. My daughter builds whole songs in GarageBand, and she just, she'll just build out everything. I found out today that she plays the drums. And she was like, she plays the bass, the keyboard. She said, oh, I'm playing the national anthem at this baseball game today. And she's like, I'm missing it because I'm here with all of you. I said, what are you going to play? I was trying to think of how she's going to play the bass. She goes, oh, the drums. I'm like, I didn't even know she's playing the drums. Okay, Andy.
Just quickly, sometimes you can get into a philosophical analysis of why a certain input method works and why it might not be quite so good. And one of the great things about the iPad is that there is absolutely nothing between yourself and the pixels. When you have there's a difference between using both hands or even using just one hand to touch and slide and interact with things directly versus I have a pencil in my hand and then that pencil in it is an instrument between myself and the software that's going to translate my ideas to something that other people can see. So that actually is a factor, and that's why it's such a powerful and statement of class to say, well, what could you do with the pencil that you couldn't do with your finger? And if that's not something that comes rightly to mind, then there's really no advantage to taking away that level of intimacy.
I mean, if you look at, like, even I built this little telestrator, and the thing is, this is with a pen. Now, this isn't the iPad, this is a Wacom tablet, but I tried it with my finger. It's not the same, and being able to draw something and however I want to, if I'm trying to do a diagram and, do this, I can do it with my finger, and they do it in the NFL. They used to do it with a finger, but they moved because it's just a little bit more fine control, of what you're actually working with. Next question is from Andrew Hall from Yerba Linda, California. What are the panel members' opinions on the new object capture? Any insights yet, especially in the ease of use for a novice app developer? Go ahead, Jason.
I'm sure it's the easiest thing ever, and as far as the quality of capture, I really haven't had enough chance to play with it to really get a good sense. Yeah,
here's what's exciting about it. Go ahead, Andy. I'll let you tell it.
Just very quickly, the thing that you're gonna enjoy about it is that it's not just about here's how to do image capture through an iPhone that has LiDAR. There's support for photo stacks. There's support, even direct mentions of taking pictures from ingesting stuff from drones. Now, the telling thing from the WWDC content is that with a lot of the other stuff that they're showing off, it's not just about here's how to use proximity sensing and proximity. It's also, there's also examples of here's why it's relevant. Here are use cases here are ways that you might not have thought of about how you can enhance your app with the ability to sense not only the proximity of a HomePod but also exactly where it is. With the capture stuff, it really is just about here is how to get the damn thing working inside your app. So
yeah, and the thing is that we've seen this with LiDAR, where there's a whole bunch of apps because Apple gave developers the APIs that they needed to be able to do this, and suddenly everyone's doing it because all you have to do is turn it on. A lot of hard work, a lot of white papers from SIGGRAPH, a lot of other things that all went into creating something that a developer can just go, oh, I'm going to add that to what I'm doing. With object capture, so I've been doing object capture of some version of this since the late 90s. And when we started this, I always want to back up a little bit, because you always want to be, oh, I remember you think this is hard now. You should have seen back in the day. You used to take pictures and take a cube and you'd get the cube to fit so it looked like it had the right thing. And you just build models based on the photo modeling. And then finally we were able to kind of identify points and start to figure it out. And then it started to add more points on its own. And then it started to build, what we call today's photogrammetry with Metashape and reality capture and other tools like that. And some of them started to be able to take LiDAR. These are all really heavy math. This is like real development. And what Apple's done is really brought it to a developer who wants to build a great interface, but doesn't want to do the heavy math of figuring out how am I going to integrate all those things. And that's the thing that's exciting, is that Apple's giving that to them. And I think we're going to see an explosion of people figuring out how to use that because they don't have to figure out the deep math that was required to do that, because it looks like what they're doing, looking at the content there, is that they're actually using multiple cameras when you have them, using LiDAR for edge detection, I think using LiDAR for scale. So all these things, and that's the holy grail. The LiDAR, the structured light, mixed with the unstructured photography. The LiDAR gives you accuracy, gives you scale, and gives the position of where those images are. The photogrammetry is going to add all the little details, like all the little bumps and everything else. And the fact that from there you can generate the normal maps and the texture maps and the bump maps and everything else. Again, that's been Apple's saving developers, like an average developer, like 20 years of research to just be able to go, oh, now I'll just drop it in my app and make it work. Go ahead, Andy, and then Jason.
very quickly. You really hit upon it, that this is not just big. It's not even just big, heavy number crunching. This is not a tool that came to light when we suddenly have Xeon processors on the top Mac Pro. This came about when you have a neural engine chip inside this thing. Believe it or not, most of this capture stuff is being processed by the neural engine, not by the M1 directly. That's why it's not supported by Intel. So yeah, that's a lot of heavy lift, a lot of U-Haul rentals that you no longer have to pay for.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think it's going to end up yielding better results for objects. Now, people are asking like, oh, is Metashape in trouble? Not really. I mean, there's a lot of these high-end tools that are doing photogrammetry do a lot of things that this doesn't do. But for basic object capture, it's pretty exciting. And I think that we're going to see more of those, the clone tools, other tools that already are still adding more to it. I think that a lot of those things will mix in well. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, and more importantly than what the structured light adds is what the structured light allows to be removed. You know, a smooth texture when you're doing photogrammetry is so hard to do, even if your form is perfect. And that's where the structured light is really just worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Bobby Rafferty from Rockville, Maryland says, what Apple products based on, besides iPhone 12, support Dolby Vision? Jason?
I'm going to answer this exactly the way that he said it. Technically, for playback, any iPhone beginning with the iPhone 8 will absolutely support the playback of Dolby Vision. Keep in mind, it's not going to be on that screen. It can't record in Dolby Vision, but if you're just talking about the thing that can reproduce on an outside screen, going as far back as the iPhone 8.
And what I can say for relative certainty, go ahead, Chris.
I'll just add that any of the iPad Pros can support editing and export of Dolby Vision as well, but not the earlier ones.
Yeah. I think that we found everything last year and above. I mean, all the Apple products are adding Vision and Atmos, support. So I know that everything that we bought over the last year has been supporting it. So it's coming up to speed. Paul Conaway from Columbus, Ohio said, did this year's WWDC improve on the ease of development across all the Apple platforms for developers? We'll start with Jason.
We'll have a better sense of it once we can really look at the cloud. Like, really iCloud is going to make all the difference, I think.
Go ahead, Ari.
Yeah, so this isn't like a super sexy answer to it, but as far as like across platforms, I think every framework that you might want to adopt needs to have really good documentation, and their doc documentation compiler is actually a huge deal for developers. Allows you to get your API reference in Xcode, even for third-party frameworks. Write articles inside of it as well. And then the tutorials, which I thought were really so excellent on Swift UI, they've now made it available for everybody. So like as somebody I wrote AudioKit, even in the early days, they said, don't use 2-letter extension prefixes because Apple owns those. I did it anyway, because I wanted to look as much like a Apple native framework as possible. And now I really can, because I plan to make tutorials and articles that not just look like Apple, but actually do a better job of documentation than Apple is known for. When Doxy first came out, someone on our Slack group made the joke, like, is this going to add a no overview available to all the documentation? Because it seems like Apple's docs always say that these days.
Can you tell us a little about Doxy, like how that actually works?
So when you write your code, we've been writing 3 slashes before like methods and class names and things like that. And inside that, you can write a description. You can define more information about parameters. And it will, if you do code completion, it'll show you that summary as you're doing it. And it'll show you in a sidebar. And you can also run SwiftDoc and like create a website that has these things. But now Apple says, we're going to do that. It's going to look just like our stuff. So they've extended that to allow you to, it's all in Markdown, and they've added some Markdown extensions that allow you to directly link to other parts of the code. So someone's reading it, learning new, they can click on it and jump to where that's defined. And I think they've done a lot of work to make that really useful. But then they've really gone above and beyond, not just to make the API reference really good, but to have articles and these tutorials that take you step by step and have code that highlights all the new portions of the code, depending on how far along in the tutorial are, and it has optional images of where you should be at that point in the example that you're tutoring. So yeah, it's going to be great, and I hope it, if nothing else, I hope it like shames other frameworks to do more documentation. Like I don't want to like point out any particular person, but there are some frameworks you go to, and they'll have a nice README. You just can place like, you want to use this, or that. You're just like looking at the README file, say who did the best job of doing the README and making your choice there. But now you can say, okay, well, I don't want to just see a README on GitHub. I want to see the full. Right. I want to see some articles. I want to see some tutorials. Yep. And to that end, I really do hope that GitHub supports this doc archive format so that we don't. In the WWDC, the description was, okay, make your rewrite rules Apache so that you can serve out HTML pages directly from the doc archive. Well, that's great, but like I would really just like to see that inside GitHub as a supported thing, like their wiki. If you put up a doc archive, it just knows how to serve that information properly.
That's great. Chris, anything that's do you think it's making your job easier?
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously heading in a lot of directions for that. The new async await functionality in Swift is huge for that. The biggest problem with all of these changes is, for example, async await is only going to be on iOS 15. And if you have a code base that's, built for earlier, devices, and if you have part Objective-C and Swift, in some ways it's harder. Now, Apple's done a lot to make that easier, and it's gotten better over the years. And we're moving our, code base from Objective-C to Swift quite quickly. But keeping up with some of those changes is sort of difficult. So you write it one way, then you write it a second way, then you write it a third way. Then finally you get to that point where, wow, async await's the perfect way. And I can't wait to get to it, but it'll be another year or 2 years before we can get to that, So those are the hard parts about it. But I do love to see where Apple's headed with things. And that's always fun to watch, to see that direction and see it continue to improve.
Absolutely. Jesse Schwartz says, with Apple's updated Reality Kit announcement, what new AR experience do you think will be compelling? Go ahead, Jason.
Location anchors is going to be huge. Like the
Can you
idea
explain
that
those?
So location anchors is basically, Alex's idea that's been explained in the past on office hours of, where are the bathrooms? Here they are. That kind of thing, and it can be set through playback and recording, and it's going to take a while, but I think that's going to be fantastic. That combined with hands and faces is just going to be cool.
What Jason's referring to is, I've often said, we work in a lot of arenas, and people will have these crazy AR solutions that they want, and I'm like, when I'm in a stadium or arena, I just want to know where the restroom is and where I can buy hot dogs. I just when I pick up my phone, I just want big arrows that tell me where to go. And so anyway, that's what's there. Yeah, it should be really interesting. I think that we are going to get to a point where we're augmenting a lot of the world around us, and I think that there's a lot we can add to it from an educational perspective as well. Think about going to a historical location and being able to pull up data in real time based on where you're at. And having things annotated while you're walking around, which is would be useful. Jan Landy says, Apple Store question: how do you compensate for one lifetime price for your apps? Can you just survive without repeat buyers?
So, from LumaFusion standpoint, that's one of the differentiators of our app is it's a one-time purchase, not a subscription.
Right.
And the good thing is that the volume, that's available through the App Store has made it a very good business for us so far. Now, we would love to have an update model, which Apple doesn't provide. But what we've decided on is something that for some of the advanced features that we're coming out with, like, multicam and our video scopes and things like that, those will be in packages that'll be one-time in-app purchases. And so people can choose whether it's useful to them and make that purchase. But we've decided to stay away from the subscription, except for our royalty-free content library that we license. That's available as a subscription. And that, has become a nice little bit of income as well. So we've been successful with that model so far. And we hope that, our users will see value in the new things we're coming out with and pay for those, and it'll keep this business going. So far, so good.
Yeah, Ari?
Yeah, well, like in case of AudioKit, I think because of the way the App Store is set up, is we've actually focused less on like making like the one synth that we have to keep up to date to keep us afloat, to saying we're going to put out a lot of different products that are related. So a lot of different synths. You'll get repeat buyers based on your brand if you've done a good job in the past. We offer limited edition apps, which is kind of a way to deal with that. It's like people know that if they don't get this version of the app right now, that they may not be able to get it a year down the line. There's a lot of tricks, like a lot of marketing type ploys where as developers we're exploring to get people to buy our apps. But I think there's like humanity's constantly reproducing itself. There's going to be new buyers for your stuff if you've done a good job.
I know that pretty much. I think I own everything that you guys make. So both these developers, and so but I think that and part of it is just that I want to support what you're doing. As much as a user, I'm so excited about what both of you are working on. I'm always like, I'll just buy that. Like I'll put, because I'm voting, as and because the prices have gotten. I mean, a lot of us are old enough to know that these prices are not what they used to be. I mean, I sold, my product was like $200 or something like that. And that was just one little plugin in one little app. So the idea that you can be buying products for $5 or $40 or $80 to me is well worth the price of admission. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. So, funny story behind that. The first product I did, Hollywood Effects, we sold for $500
right.
per unit, and it did 1/100th of what LumaFusion does. But, when we go to a trade show, it depends on the trade show. If we go to NAB, people are like, why isn't it $300? And if we go to VidCon, it's why isn't it free? So, it's a completely different, marketplace that we have to be in and find that middle ground to hopefully make it fun for everybody.
I know we when we had DV Matt out, at $70, we could barely sell it. At $150, it was like hotcakes. And people we had to get the number that people took it seriously. It was a very odd thing. Go ahead, Jason.
+1 to all of that. I have never regretted buying an iOS app for more than 30 seconds. I mean, the most expensive one you're going to get is what, $100 tops?
Oh, I spent a lot of money on them, I think.
Oh, no.
The most expensive one I spent like
$10,000 last year on apps. But at the end of the day, that was a lot of apps.
Yeah, it's a lot of apps. Hattie Mowell asks, what can we hope to expect regarding the new dynamic documentation generation? I think we kind of talked about that. We kind of worked through that, so that's a great question there. Alex Forty Goldner is back with what percentage of the QuickTime framework has been implemented in AV Foundation? What functionality gaps would you like to see Apple fill in? Go ahead, Jason.
I'm going to be glib here. I want old QuickTime back. Like, am I the only one? That's all I want.
I still have one Mojave. I still have a Mojave app, laptop. It's sitting right over here, and I can still run QuickTime 7, on it. And there's a handful of things that I go. And I know Apple hates to hear us say that, but we're always like, I want my QuickTime 7 back. Anyway, but it's it's gotten so much better. I mean, nowadays there's so much functionality in QuickTime, but some of the layers and some of the deep dive is the part that for all of us we're trying to get back. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, not from a developer point of view, but from a consumer point of view, one of my most used apps is QuickTime Player, simply because I've downloaded a video. It's got crap at the start. It's got crap at the bottom. I would like to remove the crap from the start and the bottom and just have like the central part like on my media server. And every other media app is like, okay, well first import this into then it's like then suddenly I've got an 8.2 gigabyte file that started off as like a 500 megabyte YouTube clip. So yeah, we need little point and shoot detail oriented one thing, do it perfectly well apps like that.
And I use Switch for that. I mean, that's Telestream's version of QuickTime, the QuickTime Player. It's a little bit of money to buy it, but I use Switch to do those edits. The problem is that the part that is still missing is the sprites, the layers. I mean, we used to develop whole thing. Like I have our first training that we put out was actually all using animating in. There was Adobe, I think it was called Go, that would let you animate all the stuff inside of QuickTime. It was a QuickTime editing package. and you could take advantage of all the sprite layers and everything else. And we did all of that there because I didn't have the money to pay for the bandwidth. So we were like, well, we can't do this in video. And now, of course, none of them run. So you can't even open them. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Apple could do, I mean, if you've looked at clips, they've obviously brought in part of their motion, framework from the desktop to there. And if they could make that available as part of AV Foundation, that would go a long ways, allowing us to bring in animations that work as effects within any tool. We'd love to see something like that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Well, and lastly, to Andy's point, this used to be so easy in iTunes. You could actually set an in point and an out point, and they would get rid of those tails, but not anymore.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see as we move in QuickTime and as Apple keeps on moving into immersive, what happens with, we're seeing these object creation tools. So we have object capture. We see it now in Motion. So now we can load in USDZ files inside of Motion. You can take those and it works in Final Cut. So there's these 3D model, stuff. So it'll be interesting to see when QuickTime or how QuickTime will support those as layers, as we keep on moving forward. I took a QuickTime model and we were talking about things that were missing. I took a QuickTime or a USDZ model, brought it into Motion and animated it as a turntable, and then put that into Keynote. I just rendered it out with an alpha channel and dropped it into Keynote. And as soon as I did, I was like, I really want just the 3D models inside a Keynote. I just, so hopefully, but in the same way, I kind of want that inside of QuickTime as well. Let's see. Mason Lancaster from Pasadena said, will Apple's focus be useful for switching from one task set to another? Go ahead, Jason.
They certainly hope so, and I certainly think they keep blurring the lines little by little. The continuity keeps getting more and more and more refined. Yeah. One of the most complicated things the human mind can do is switch contexts, and every year it seems to be just a little bit better.
Yeah. Next question is from Alex Forty Goldner again. Any mentions or hints on how Metal will handle non-SoC based GPU power in the future? No hints?
Yeah.
I wish.
No idea. I think system on the chip is going to be the thing.
Yeah, a lot of their
looking backwards.
Yeah, a lot of their focus in the videos I watched was about the whole rendering pipeline that is based on their SoC, which is their tile-based renders, and there's a real focus on that. So I would say that's the hint, is that that's the direction they're going.
Yeah, Apple's not been ever known for backwards compatibility. It's not like they look that far back. They're kind of like, okay, we're moving on. And I think that a lot of us were unclear of. I know that when the M1 was announced, or they said we're coming out with the M1, I was like, okay, well, we'll see how that goes. And I'll maybe they'll figure it out by the third or fourth chip. I think now that the M1's out and we've seen the performance, now all we're waiting for, I stopped buying everything else. Like I was just like, okay, freeze, don't buy anything new, just because of the performance jumps. And I think that part of the problem is that externalizing the communication, once you get out of the chip, there's huge efficiency drops. So touching anything outside of that chip is going to draw it. I don't think there's anything that a graphics card could give you that would make up for the loss of going over the board, over the buses. So there's nothing. That's the problem. It's not so much that they couldn't do it or they're not going to do it, but the problem is that going outside of that chip, there's such a loss in efficiency. I don't see how they're going to want to go back to anything that's going to be there. Mark Wickman from Minneapolis says, will AirPlay for Mac allow me to use a 2017 27-inch iMac as the display for an M1 Mac Mini? Jason.
Mark, my understanding is no, sorry. I think it's U1 and above, which is 2019.
There you go. But still pretty slick that you can use those monitors there. By the way, if you're out there watching, we're starting to run a little low on questions. So for our viewers, jump in there and ask some more, or we'll just talk amongst ourselves for a little while. All right. Next question here is from Neil Avellito from Boca Raton, Florida. He said, Universal Control is fantastic on the Apple ecosystem. Any of you believe that Apple will open source it or open the APIs to allow cross-platform support, Windows, Android, Chromebooks for the Universal Control? I don't think there's a lot of, everyone's like, Probably
not
not.
a chance.
It's not really the game. Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
You're a funny man, Neil. I appreciate you, and I will buy your album. There's realize that we have the quote from from Apple vice presidents who's saying we're not going to even put iMessage on Android because it would help family members buy Androids. So no, they're not going to help. They're not going to help anybody else sell any other kind of computers.
It's and we have to. I think we want to put that in perspective as well. As someone who's, I mean, I've developed some stuff that we've had to open up the framework to it, and part of developing for other platforms is that it becomes much more complex to innovate. Yeah. So we want to take it in. It's not just the matter of business models, but it also is the matter of how do I support that on an ongoing basis, and that is something that. As soon as I know when we started developing some of the tools we were making and we started letting other people do it, as soon as you start changing things, everyone's upset. You go, okay, well, I got to change this framework, and now everyone's all, there's pitchforks and torches and everything else about the fact that you move something over. And so I know from what I do that I pay the price for Apple making AirPlay and some of the other stuff available on TVs. I pay for that every day. I pay every day. I pay for that. Go ahead, Andy.
but just to button this up, the fact that I don't think anybody thinks that Apple is going to support this on other platforms. Yeah. However, that's not going to prevent the developers at Google from supporting this, including the Mac. It's not going to support Linux developers from supporting it and including the Mac. If it proves to be a very, very useful sort of concept, just as we've seen things, viruses tend to cross the blood-brain corporate barrier. And it's the same thing as for great user interface design.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Jump species. That's what I was looking for. Sorry. Not
Alex Forty Goldner said Apple defined EDR as HDR representation plus HDR rendering on many kinds of displays, including SDR displays. Reactions, Jason?
Yeah, my understanding of this was you don't need an HDR display to make sure that you're getting both enhanced data rate HDR and SDR for your app. Here's how to use scopes, and here's to make sure, it looks not terrible on both.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris. Did you have any insight on that?
Yeah, so first of all, that was one of my favorite sessions, and I would almost recommend it to anybody who has any interest in HDR. It had a lot of good explanations of some of the issues with HDR. And what I really liked was the attention to detail that Apple, presented about, looking at displays and their reference white point versus, their highest, available nits, and looking at how they map that in. And again, for me, it was that attention to detail, knowing that Apple is doing, again, the heavy lifting to make sure that the display is going to be correct for your HDR media based on your actual display you're working on and the brightness you have set and those kind of things. And I like that. Again, the one thing I was disappointed at, some of the lower level APIs are only available on Mac OS at the moment. And so we're hoping to see that, because we are doing some stuff on iPad with scopes now and things like that need to look at the, the full range of data. And we're having to do a lot of the work ourselves, and that would have saved us a little time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the tone mapping of a lot of what Apple's doing to make sure that the HDR looks good on SDR displays they do a good job of it. I think for me sometimes it's a little confusing because you open something up and you have an HDR and it looks fine, but it's the way then you upload it to YouTube and it all looks washed out, and you're like, oh, because the monitor is doing all the work for you, and it just makes it look great all the time. And I'm kind of like, I kind of need a button that just says make it look like it is, so I know what's going out, and that's been one of the things that's kind of caught me off guard a couple times. Paul Conaway from Columbus, Ohio says, what other Swift language features would you like to add to the language? Concurrence announced this year. Anything that you'd like to see in the Swift language? No? It's perfect? It's got it all? Ari?
I mean, it's not necessarily a part of the Swift language, but it is something that came out at the same time as Swift came out, pretty much, as the Swift package manager. So it started off not that useful because it didn't include resources, and they added resources last year, I think, and that made it useful. And I'd like to see that continue. This year they announced Swift package collections, which allows us, anybody, to create curated package lists. So that'll help, like, if you trust a certain developer or somebody or they have on their tutorial the packages that they use. That's going to be a nice way of getting into the language. There's this problem of discovery is going to be helped by these collections, but they could go one step further, and basically Apple or even GitHub could say they're going to become the canonical index for Swift packages and Swift package collections. That would be, I think that would have a far-reaching effect that I think a lot of developers would benefit from.
Yeah. Chris, anything there?
Yeah. So for me, I just thought of any low-level memory access. Apple has added things to Swift to allow for that, but it's probably the most inscrutable part of the language right now. I've been a developer since doing assembly language through C, through C++, and it's the hardest thing to write, to just get to a few bytes of data and say, I want to see that as a float, and I would love to see them improve that over time. So that's mine.
Good. Jason?
Although I was happy that they added scalable vector graphics a couple of years ago, how about real Adobe Illustrator, like actual drag and drop? That would be really nice.
Very good. Mason Lancaster says, Jason had a good point about context switching, the ability to keep the same context switching from the Mac to iPad to iPhone seems really to be getting there, getting better and better. Any comments about that process?
Yeah, I mean, from our standpoint, we are, looking at that from a lot of different, standpoints. Apple has some technologies to allow us to take what we've done on iPad, with Catalyst to bring it to Mac, and we are looking very carefully at that and working on some things there. And I think it is getting better and better where we can. One of the things they added this year, for example, on iOS is categorized menu items, keyboard shortcuts, that correspond to menus, and those same menus will be on the Mac. Those kind of things will make it easier for us to develop an app that will feel right on both platforms. It's not about having just straight cross-platform, but it's about having the right tools that make it consistent on platforms when it's possible.
Absolutely. Talak Miguel Lopez Waterman says, how will the new password workflow be changed, the way that we think about security? And maybe more importantly, what will we be able to do with a password if the new system fails? Or how will we be able to get in with a password if the new system fails? Go ahead, Jason.
Apple always has one additional form of authentication that is necessary at any given time, so I'm sure that there is going to be at least one form of recourse, whether you cut off your thumb or you burn your face, or you get the idea. And as far as, how it's going to change our understanding, for anyone who has a password manager, it won't. And for, everyone's mother or grandmother, it may very well save them.
I think that I just feel like I'm so ready to get rid of passwords. I just have to say, because they're just such a huge security flaw. I mean, I want everything to be, all biometric, at that point. And so I'm excited when I see more and more of that. Now, I want it to be the typical, I want my thumb, I want to be able to say something, I want to look at my face, to log into my phone, and I need all of those for me to get in there. But I think that we've seen some of the problems with that when it comes to masks. So I'm still typing in my number all the time because it still doesn't. Even with the new version, I'm still struggling with that. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, if things work out the way that Apple and actually Google want it to happen, it will actually be easier to. The idea of I can't, my password security is so good that I'm locked out of my own account and I can't recover it. That wouldn't even be an issue, because they're talking about stuff like non-federated pairs, like having public and private keys that are shared only between your device that's logging in and the server. So you have part of it that is publicly shareable that does not compromise your account, and a conversation that happens on the device level. And what gives your phone or your computer permission to please share that key with the server and log me in is something biometric, something that again is on your thumb or on your retina, or something that you don't have to remember. So of course there always has to be some way to recover your account, usually through very, very analog means. The whole idea is that there is nothing that can be forgotten, which means that there's nothing that can be phished, because you can't provide a bad person with the information they need to compromise your account. They can't spoof your SMS. They can't spoof your cell phone number to do a two-factor authentication there. So that is the goal. Apple's starting to talk about this a bit. There is a video that I do heartily recommend because it doesn't. My favorite videos as a non-developer are not the ones that necessarily say, "Here's how to implement this," but here is the thinking behind it. Also, it's the one place officially on Apple where they will talk about. They won't answer with, "We don't talk about unannounced products," but they will say that here is where we want to take this. And again, the message is we want to make it so that there is nothing to be compromised. It's there's something biometric, and then the math computers talk math to each other to let you into your account.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
To Andy's point, one of my very favorite repeating, every year in WWDC presentations has always been understanding wayfinding and design, how functional design and UI and UX and how the two actually go together, hot and cold, blending together. You can understand that functionally. Absolutely worth listening to and watching, even if you've never written a line of code and have no intention upon doing so.
Zaid from Washington, D.C. says, which collaboration features in a SharePlay app would be useful at the design phase or production phase? Also, in the underlying use of, is the underlying use of FaceTime acceptable? So for Chris, do you see anything that you jump into there? Oh, can't hear you, Chris. You're muted there.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been looking at SharePlay closely, but I have had some thoughts about there. The fact that you can coordinate based on data in addition to the video opens up a whole new set of possibilities that I haven't even begun to think about. Oddly enough, the one I was thinking about was my family does a game night every week where, they're on Zoom and then trying to play code names in a web browser. And it's usually 15 minutes of people trying to get the web browser up at the same time as, FaceTime. Just something simple like that integrated, but in any type of collaboration, I see it with Keynote, I see it with Word, with Pages, anything else. It'll make, collaboration easier, I think, because it'll combine those elements.
Yeah, and I think part of it is it's not that these collaboration tools haven't existed before. Right. It's just that they're always a little quirky. It's like it's always like it kind of works. And so being able to just kind of open it up and have it work, I think will definitely open it. And I don't think it necessarily replaces those. I think that FaceTime, for instance, is really, really easy to use, but I still use Zoom for a lot of things too. It's not, it doesn't solve all of those problems. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, along those lines, it's worth mentioning that SharePlay can do a whole lot more than just help you watching Netflix with, your friends. Mm-hmm. That, it is effectively a way to do an in-sync time code establishment. Yeah. But they have demoed a lot more than that. And collaborative gaming, for example, can absolutely be open. And I can't wait to see how they're going to play with it next year.
Ari, do you see anything from a music perspective that might be affected by some of these SharePlay tools? Open you're muted, Ari.
I'd have to experience it to see what kind of latency there is, because music is very difficult to get that right. If it's slightly off, it's not going to be good. Just like right now, this audio not working well right now ruins my response.
Yeah, absolutely. Sam Heichelbeck from Columbus, Indiana says, on MacBreak, there was a discussion of spatial 3D audio and classical music for opera and any theater in which performers move about a physical space. Could AirPods calculate on the fly to compensate in directional changes in staging? Go ahead, Jason.
I think I heard that discussion, and my understanding is the only thing that AirPods are actually calculating is how that really heavy encoding is going to be interpreted as to your head. Everything else, like, complex-wise, is on the streamer's end, not on the decoder's end.
The game engines can actually do this. So a lot of this can be, so what you can do is you can apply those sounds, again, in spatial inside of a game engine, whether it's Unity or Unreal Engine, so that it knows where you are in the space, and there's sounds that are coming from around you. So you can actually, we've already done some rough things in this area where you can hear it around you as you're walking through it, which is actually pretty interesting. But it's really attaching to the game engine. Go ahead, Andy.
I do think that this is an illustration of some of the problems or some of the concepts we're going to have to decide upon when you're creating content with spatial audio. For instance, and this is a good example. Like, do I want to hear when there's a duet between two performers on stage? Do I want to hear, okay, Diana Damrau is stage left, Piotr Bielski, I can't pronounce his last name, is stage right? Or do I want to basically, I don't care that if, do I want to replicate the experience of being in the theater, listening to this live, or do I want to have a more theatrical experience of, no, these are, I am listening in on this private conversation between these two characters at an important part of their relationship. And it would be a great demo to say, well, now you're exactly at the Metropolitan Opera House, or you're now you're in a more intimate space like La Scala. Well, maybe that would be a good demo, but pretty much I just want to hear La Traviata and really forget about the space that I'm in and just enjoy the music and enjoy the performance. That's something that I just like the early days of movies when we had to decide, is this like a stage play where we just put the camera where the audience would be and film it, or do we take advantage of the fact that we can jump cut, we can put focus on one character, we can compress time, and that language I think is going to take us a while to figure out as creators.
And I think that, I look back, my kids can barely watch movies made before about 1990. It's very hard. There's a handful of them that they'll watch, but they're so used to fast cuts and all the things that were crazy when they happened. When we got used to it, people were like, "Oh, that's way too much," or this is, they've gone crazy. The Matrix was doing all this crazy stuff with the cameras and to tell those stories, and some of it just fades away because that was a bad idea, and then the stuff that works sticks. And there's been 100 years of that, and only about 5 years of spatial. maybe people will argue 20 years of spatial, but in real mass market, I think that's only been a small amount, and that'll be interesting. Go ahead, Jason.
As an aside, it drives me nuts in action sequences when they shake the camera unnecessarily. I hope that goes away forever.
Yeah, but I think that we're going to see as it matures, we're going to see things that work and things that don't work. But I'm going to keep on pushing on Ari to give us some good spatial tools, because I really feel like hearing the music and everything else around be exciting. Go ahead, Andy.
I'll make a quick statement, hopefully not sending us down a rat hole, even though I think it would be a great
it's going to.
Yeah, but just this is why I find it so hard to watch like the Marvel Avengers movies, even though I'm a comic book guy, because all of their action scenes are just not possible. They're like, you've got a drone that's following a character's face from 8 inches, no matter how much time they're flipping, and they pull out at exactly the right moment when he catches the shield, and then it tracks on the shields, it flies and bounces off and I don't know whether this is just bad filmmaking or whether this is the fact that I didn't grow up with this sort of film language, but I come from the land of reality, from like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, where they suddenly cut to an outside shot because, oh my God, we thought this tunnel went to an exit. It actually leads to the exit of a sheer cliff face. And now the camera operator now has to he didn't find it fast enough, so he's kind of move a little bit, which is exactly how we'd see it if it were actually being filmed by a real person. Just like WALL-E, a completely digital movie, but it put all these camera moves that, okay, I didn't follow this action fast enough, which makes it so much more real. So maybe I'm old, or maybe this is, like you said, they're experimenting with some stuff, and this stuff is not going to last too much longer.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump to the next question here. We got Alex Forty Goldner said, I was hoping to have the option to learn Swift via a Swift Playground to make FX plugins for Motion in Final Cut Pro. What other bits of code that are less than an app would be a good subject for a Swift Playground? Ari?
Yeah, I do a lot of stuff in Swift Playgrounds, and I write some plugins. And I have to say, this question is a little bit like asking, I'd like to learn how to play guitar on the stage of Madison Square Garden. That would be a very bad place for Swift Playgrounds to be for plugin development. Basically anywhere else, Swift Playgrounds are really great for small compartmentalized things. So if you want to, like, in terms of like FX plugins, if you want to like make an effect on a rasterized image or something, maybe that's a good use for Playgrounds. But certainly, to develop it to be a plugin, that's going to be very difficult to do with the Playground.
Go ahead, Jason.
I'll give you a really easy one. A quick interactive 2-party signed PDF. That would be a great Swift Playground.
Very good. Can you think of anything, Chris, that might apply to what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, partly to what Ari was saying, video filters could be an interesting area for it. For example, core image filters would be nice. They'd have to add, kernel metal development, which they may already have kernel development in there. I don't know for sure. And certain other extensions that are available on iOS, like activity extensions that can preview an object or something like that. Those, I think, would all be interesting ones that ought to be able to be done within Swift Playgrounds.
Next question coming in from Steve Brenneman from Indianapolis. He says, if Alex had just one base model M1 Mac Mini back in the Rebel Mac days at ILM, along with all the software that is currently works on it, how much difference would it have made? What should someone making 25-year plan expect from Apple by then? Yeah, I mean, I wrote a 3-page paper to get us to go from our Macs. To go from 128 megs of RAM to 192 megs of RAM, and I wrote a paper on how much more efficient and how our labor would be a lower cost over time, and that they would amortize over 6. I wrote this whole paper about this at ILM and I got it. We all got 64 megs of RAM again, and then I goes, okay, let's write another paper so we can all get an extra Mac to render to, and that I was not popular because the render time was our coffee time that I just took away from it. So we got more efficient, but suddenly we didn't have all these. Oh, I got to go render, so I'm gonna go walk around ILM for a little while and see what they're doing over at
Bellissimo,
Windward
you forgot to give us homework for Easter vacation. Oh, thank you, Alex.
We could work harder if you just gave us another computer. Everyone was like, yeah, thanks for that. That's great. I think that at this point, the level of complexity that we were rendering the Queenship and other things that I was doing there was probably 45 minutes of frame. Right now on the iPhone would probably render at about 3 or 4 minutes of frame. And that would be, on the last generation iPhone, if you hit render on it, it would probably not take very much. And so it's come. What we do though in visual effects is we don't make it faster, we make it better. So we just keep on, let's just add some more detail. Let's just throw 45 minutes seems to be the pain threshold for the average shot in a movie. And every time you get to 45 minutes, you're like, we'll just turn the dial up a little bit. But when we look at real time now, it's become pretty amazing as we move forward with that. Carmi Vizovic said from Redondo Beach says, what do you think about the changes to Apple Pay and the wallet? Go ahead, Jason.
It's going to take a little while for the states to catch up, but I don't know anyone who hates the idea. We could run through scenarios about, if you get pulled over and whatnot, but for the most part, I think this is where we're all going one way or another.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
I'm just concerned about digital divide issues, that if there will always be ability to take out this piece of plastic, the printed text will always work. But what happens when there's one line at the TSA for people who can simply tap in with their phone, and a much longer line for people who are going to use a paper traditional identification? And where does it leave people who? There are a lot of people who are using feature phones. There are a lot of people who are using pay-as-you-go, like blister pack phones, and they don't all have the sort of security standards that can support that kind of documentation. And then you also get to, as Jason was alluding to, certain privacy contentions where Apple has to make sure they're really, really clear that if I'm letting a state trooper look at my electronic driver's license, the phone is locked. It is just simply a $1,200 device that does nothing but beacon out that one little ID that they can then use to check that this is a valid license. You can't forget all the times where, oh no, we'll make sure that the people who don't have the right technology are still going to be able to use this. But that means that, well, we would love it if you put this radio transponder on your car that would let you breeze all the way through the tolls, and also lets us track your car if we need to. But hey, no, that's fine. If you want to use exact change, we will keep one kiosk open that will always have a long line behind it. If you want to opt out of a search at the TSA, oh, you can do that. We're just going to make it such an awful process that you will do it once, and then after you realize it took you 30 minutes to get through the checkpoint instead of 30 seconds, you're never going to ask to do it again. So we have to. Technology will not solve all problems everywhere until it makes sure that it's there to address everybody at every level.
I know for me that I use Apple Pay a lot. I've pretty much started sorting out stores and gas stations and everything else that don't support Apple Pay. Like if I have to pull out my credit card, I'm like, okay, this is the last time I'm coming here. And so, like at first it was like I was excited to go out and find a place that did it, but like I go to Chevron instead of Shell in Novato, California, because the Shell doesn't support Apple Pay, and I'm just like, I can't do this with my watch, and so I'm not gonna come here anymore. And so because I just don't want to touch anything, like and I think COVID has made us more touchy about that. But when I go to the supermarket, when I go to other things, I don't really want to, I didn't like touching things before, and now I really don't like touching things. And so I think that is one of the bits and pieces of it, of making that stuff more secure. I do agree with you. I think that some people have already started to use, Andy, to your point, they use cashless, and states and cities are starting to make that not available, because by making it cashless, they also change their clientele to where they want to change it. And so that's been a challenge of saying, hey, we just don't take cash, and then that just limits who comes in. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, my limit is about 8 weeks without ever having to touch a debit card or a credit card, just not an ATM, nothing. It was fantastic.
I haven't used cash in a year.
I've never used cash. I'm talking about I've never had to touch like a debit card for 8 weeks.
Yeah, I haven't had that, but I was noticing that I had some cash by my bed, and I realized that my mom had sent it to me for my birthday, and it's still sitting there. Sorry, Mom, if you're watching, it's still sitting there. I'm gonna spend it on something good, Mom, but it's still sitting there on the bed. Like I was like, because I have to think about where to put it. Like I don't have anywhere to put the cash.
I keep giving you my Bitcoin wallet address, but you just it's almost as if you're defiant about not sending me Bitcoin.
Exactly. Shane Foley from Ashland, Oregon says, how will the recent WWDC announcements impact education? What technology do you see having the greatest long-term effect? I think that the share play is going to be a big deal, for classes. I think I'm really excited about that. Go ahead, Jason.
Shares play is going to be huge. And, again, every year it's just this tiny little set of iterations to make deployment easier, more flexible, on more devices for more kids. And that is the right way to do it.
Yeah, I think that Apple's pretty far behind right now in education, and I think that they have to find ways to take that ground. And really, it had more to do less with the technology and more with the deployment. Of difficulty in deployment in fleet management turned out to be a real big issue that Apple had coming out of the gate. And they lost a lot of ground. And Google did it really well, because they didn't have to deploy; they just had it in the cloud, and so it was a little bit easier for them to push that down the path. Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, there's also a fundamental dogmatic difference between how Apple does things. They typically say, here we have seen the future. It is this. Here it is. We're giving it unto you. You're welcome. Whereas Google and pretty much everybody else is like, tell us what your needs are. Great. We will create a solution that fits those needs. And with education, it doesn't. I mean, you can have. I think that one of the most innovative computers that Apple has ever come out with is a $299 education-focused iPad that only costs $30 more if you're not in education. However, your first question is not, wow, is this using a wonderful Apple silicon, and what kind of platform does it? Oh, it has Swift. The first question is, where's the keyboard? We need to have a keyboard, and how can we administrate this really, really flexibly, and also integrate this with other hardware that we have to use? Apple says, well, you're gonna throw out all of that stuff. Like, no, we're really not.
At the same time,
thank you for the free lunch. We're going away now.
At the same time, I think one of the challenges is that when you only ask the people that are already doing it how to do it, you're limited to what their view of how to do this is. And sometimes that's accurate, and sometimes it's not. Like I'm working on some programs right now related to this, and what you had to do is throw away everything. What we're doing is we're basically saying, we're not going to pay attention to any of this. What we're going to go back to is, what do students need, and then build backwards into that. Rather than the way we've been doing it for the last. So you get kind of in this circle where it's hard to get out of the piece, because I think education's got some structural issues that'll be difficult to achieve until we get out of the box that we're in. And Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to say, from a developer standpoint, Apple could do a lot to make distribution of apps to education a lot simpler. They have a volume purchase program, but there's a lot of cases where we want to just say, hey, we want to give LumaFusion to this classroom here, and there's no easy way for us to do that, and those are the kind of things where, again, for device management and from an app store standpoint, there's a lot that I think Apple could continue to improve on, to make that easier for us.
Yeah, I do think that we want to keep our eye on things like AR and object capture. When I saw object capture, I didn't expect it. I didn't expect that. So, I mean, one of the things that we're starting to see is the USDZ inside of Motion, and I will say over and over again that Keynote and Motion are pretty lethal, mix for teaching. And putting those things in and making those available. And so, I think that kids being able to and I think we'll see this with the apps. Kids being able to just pick up their phone and take a picture, take some pictures of an object and put it into the report, or teachers being able to take pictures with their iPad or phone and being able, and again, this is something that's images from all kinds of things, not just the phone, just images that they take, however they take those, and being able to pull them in and put them into their presentations is going to be pretty profound. As we start to go down that path. Go ahead, Andy.
Ditto for live text. I was watching a WWDC video about that the other day, and it really is. It's not just about, hey, look, you've taken a picture and now you can scan a business card. It really is how to. Actually, I'm looking at it right now. Use the camera for keyboard input in your app, and that is a pretty profound change. If it's not just launching Google Lens and touching a button, but the expectation that there's something inside the camera site that I'd like to use, or even specifically, I'm using. There are PDFs of records of news. You can go to France and get any copy of any newspaper published from like 1952 to the 1700s, and the ability to, oh great, I found a reference to the thing I want to talk about, and simply to be able to please put this in my presentation or please put this in my notes immediately is a pretty transformative thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason?
Yeah, it almost makes me regret the fact that my handwriting was permanently ruined by Palm Script at some point, in the late 90s.
Yeah. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how all these technologies, and I think about, being able, when you think about the share play and being able to draw over possibly someone else's screen capture or someone else's camera or other things like that. When I look at it, even I think of things like if I could be talking to someone who's framing up, and let's see if I touch this here. This is going to be very confusing to our TD, but being able to do this in SharePlay, talking. So I'm taking a return feed and drawing around it and saying it'd be really good. This is the right distance, and so on and so forth. And being able to do that in a SharePlay, with mixing that with AR, mixing that with those pieces would be something that we'd like to see. Alex Golner from London. Alex is asking a lot of questions, but he deserves it because he's coming in from London. Anyway, what framework improvements would encourage developers to do more with home automation? Go ahead, Jason.
An explicit disintermediation of, if it's going to be in HomeKit, make it through HomeKit, HomeKit first and HomeKit only. Don't make me download your app. Don't make me sign up for your account just to get the firmware patch. Make it HomeKit.
There you go. that's I think
not that I have a strong opinion on the matter.
Yeah, exactly. Alex Forty Goldner also asked, Apple Maps has a new 3D look. I'd like to export Apple Maps 3D animation to Motion in a project containing USDZ and 2D graphics and the 3D camera move. Or in a project containing that. Well, what other apps would benefit from Apple Maps integration? Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, LumaFusion surely would. I mean, anybody who's, we have a lot of users doing their travel videos and love to have an animated, segment, of the world in there. So sure, we'd love that.
Yeah, and that'd be really great. I mean, just a map app or a map layer would be really cool, where you could have the 3D tools, built into that. Would be pretty slick. Yeah, absolutely. Nice. Taylor Holiday from Berkeley says, "Hey Ari, how do you think Swift could be improved for real-time audio?"
Yeah, well, that's sort of a plant. Taylor is the second biggest contributor to AudioKit. He's an amazing program. He's done Audulus for the iPad. I think that app. Yeah. So we did this experiment recently to write an real-time property wrapper in front of methods, and what it did was he rewrote he put modifications into the Swift compiler to check to see if the generated code was actually real-time safe, because Apple's always talking about how Swift and Objective-C aren't real-time safe, but his extension to Swift kind of showed you whether or not you could use. So we would love to do that. One of the things we learned along the way is just how terrible Swift's underlying system is. It's pretty bad. Like the C++, the build time, the tests, we couldn't even get it like running on like GitHub CI, like the tests for it. So it was kind of tough, but it's a good experiment. I'm not sure how far it's going to go. We'd love to see Apple do something that would allow us to write real-time Swift. It'd be really amazing.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Next question is from Carmi Veinzevic from Redondo Beach. Do you see Apple's privacy focus mattering to education? It does not seem that school districts care about their data being vacuumed up by Google or Microsoft. Go ahead, Jason.
I think the main concern is that they have 15,000 other things to deal with, including, 500 other things that are on fire at any given time, and they do their very best.
Go ahead, Andy.
It's going to be important, but realize that kids in education are in a very, very specific position. They get way more rights of privacy than any other human being inside the United States. There's COPA, there's FERPA, I think it's called, which is specific. COPA is for all kids up to a certain age. FERPA covers all students up until 18 in education. So it's harder for Apple to really press that advantage because there are things that they would be illegal to create and sell these services. However, there's the umbrella halo effect of Apple, meaning if you're talking about if your school system is using something that is maintained and created by Apple, people relax, they unclench a little bit. They don't have to be told about, well, we would actually get federal prosecution if we did the things that you're accusing us of doing. Don't worry, don't worry, we would love to do that, but the federal government prevents us from doing so. So until that law is appealed, and of course we're lobbying very, very heavily to have it repealed, your kids are safe. That's not something that you deal with Apple.
Well, and I think that one of the things that with privacy, I think that the Google and Microsoft is not, I don't think, using too much of that data, because of the rules that Andy's talking about. I think they're more interested in students being comfortable with their ecosystem. So I mean, that's the big play there, is that you get used to it. Unfortunately, I think the Chromebooks, at least based on my kids' experience, Chromebooks have not been something that improved their opinion of Google, as opposed to my kids hate their Chromebooks with a passion. And of course they have an iPad and a Chromebook, and so they have a daily interface between the two of them. And I think that between the two, they just want to throw their Chromebooks into the pool. And so I think that's the hard part if the kids have both of those there. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, a lot of kids do hate Chromebooks when they're issued. I won't speak for your kids, but a lot of it is because they can't install games on them. They can't do fun things with them.
I think that this is where this really, I think, underlines though where Apple has the advantage in education for the folks that can take advantage of it, which is in the creative areas. So when you want to create something, you can type with Google, but as soon as you move much past typing, things get pretty hard pretty fast. And so with the Chromebooks, and so they're used to being able to do things, take pictures with their iPad, draw on those things, make those things, and put those things together. And admittedly, my kids have had an iPad with a keyboard for a long time, so they're kind of used to that integration, and so for them it's a little frustrating.
Your kids are the ones on the project team. They're telling their other kids, "What kind of LUT are you using on this footage that you shot with your Android phone?" Okay, wait, let me do some color balancing on this. I'm not sure that you've got too much chrome on this.
Is there previs on this volcano?
Yeah, exactly. Zaid from Washington D.C. Says, when would each of you start developing professionally for ARKit or Capture rather than just R&D exploration? Jason.
I've used it professionally for the last 2 months. I did a whole huge networking on a warehouse, and it was absolutely useful. Polycam and Magic Plan together truly can give you something useful that you can then build in and, in my case, wire out an entire building. And
I know that we're already using Polycam for a lot of work. So, I mean, I think the developers are already starting to go down that path. Where we use Polycam to do measurements, and I actually, so I mean, all I'm trying to point to is that a lot of the tools are already useful. I had to build this fitting for a pipe. I think I've talked about it maybe on MacBreak, where I just scanned it with Polycam and then modeled, used it as an underlay, modeled the piece that I had to fit onto it, printed it, and put it out there. And that was all the scaling and everything else worked perfectly. Go ahead, Chris, you look like you're.
Oh, no. Well, I was going to say, I'm sure Joshua from FX Home, who was with us Monday, would probably be on board using it right away. For ourselves, I don't see directly using it anytime soon, but through something like that, I could see it being a useful feature.
Yeah, absolutely. Mason Lancaster asks what may be the last question before we just jump into our last little bit here, if we don't get any more. It said, what improvements could Apple do to make teaching more available and easier to produce? So I think that a lot of educational based stuff. So I think that teachers need more support in general on a day-to-day basis. I think that we do this thing called office hours, which we do every day, and we do it once a week for the teachers. But I think that Apple could stand to do it every day. That'd be my guess. Go ahead, Jason. Just so people have real time.
I think the Apple Store, instead of trying to sell photos for the 15 millionth time once a week in store, could probably produce something for teachers that would be very useful. Their publications on iBooks are great, but just saying, it's a good thing.
Zaid asked, when you host or manage productions, do your audio, video, B-rolls URL based or file based? Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
File based.
Carmi asks again, what is the next item of the ecosystem that you would like to see? It's a good open-ended question there. Anything that you'd like to see next?
What ecosystem?
I think of the Apple ecosystem. Oh. So what would you see in this Apple ecosystem would you like to see coming next? I think I'm excited about the continuing expansion of USDZ. So I think that it's just seeing it across all the apps and having it just treated like a media container. So I mean, it's there, it's partially there, and you can open a lot of things. You can kind of see the possibility of what's there, but knowing that every app just can just grab it and use it as a media container rather than having to think about it, I think is something that should be coming soon. Or I hope it comes soon. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, the idea that I can text a 15,000 square foot warehouse plan to somebody, right, have them look at it on the floor, scale it up in real time, and it is a 15 meg file is absolutely incredible.
Yeah. All right, final words. Anything that we missed? Anything that you were excited about that we didn't discuss? Ari, is there anything that sits at the top of your head that you were reading or watching that we didn't cover?
Yeah. So the two talks that I would kind of promote would be, one is this, I think it was today, that diagnosing unreliable code with test repetitions. I mentioned test is really important in AudioKit. I think that's going to be really interesting also for submitting bug reports to Apple, because actually some of the problems we have with their audio units is they don't produce reliable test results. So we'll have this, I can point to their own system for diagnosing these problems. And then tomorrow, I'm looking forward to writing a DSL in Swift using result builders. It's something I've wanted to do with audio, to see if we could make a sort of a Swift UI for audio type thing. So yeah, those are the only two things that you guys didn't touch upon today. So thanks, it was really great.
Absolutely. Chris?
Yeah, so mine's a really small little item that I've been asking for 5 years from Apple, and they provided it this year. And it's a little thing called PH Cloud Identifier. Photos has always been a problem for us, where on a particular device, if you bring in something from Photos, we used to try to link to the asset ID that was, in Photos and get back to it. Not only could we not get to that same asset on a different device, even on the same device, you make one change in the photo settings and those asset IDs would change completely. Now with Cloud Identifier, it'll allow us to use that media, transfer a project to another device without having to transfer the media and have it link up. That's a really big deal for us. That'll save a lot of time and a lot of bandwidth.
That's great. Jason?
Along those lines, I've had endless problem programming with core data and trying to get the local and the cloud to sync, and every year they make it a little bit better. And I get the sense that what Chris was talking about may actually give me core data the way that I want it to be addressable this year.
Andy, anything left that we didn't cover there?
Just accessibility, which is both from just the simple idea. There's a new document in user interface guidelines that just goes beat for beat for beat about making sure that you're creating accessibility in everything you do, all the way from representation of visual images to making sure that things are easier to access for pretty much everybody who who has access to a device. And we're not just talking about being able to navigate an Apple Watch with people who don't have fine motor control. There's a one of the most interesting. Sometimes there's a video you have to watch because you see the title and you're like, huh? And there's one that I watched, bring accessibility to charts in your app, and it makes a whole big point about how, well, charts are really, really important. Like in the health app, there's a lot of information about your health is being done by charts, and other kinds of visual information again are being presented by charts. There's an audio kit for presenting a chart with voiceover that will actually it will play the graph for you after telling you, here's the higher pitches represent this, as it goes over time it's representing that, and here is its birth rates in 1912, and it will 12 to 1950, and it will simply play you the graph. And this is just one video that really makes you think about how important it is not to think of accessibility as something that, oh, isn't it nice of us that we're making the tent bigger and we're inviting more people in, and more correctly saying, no, you have an obligation to make sure that everybody can use your devices and everybody can use your software. Don't think of it as something extra that you're doing, that you're adding in with whatever time and budget that you have. This is something when you first take that cap off the marker and approach the whiteboard on day one of developing your app, you have to be thinking of these things from day number one. And Apple has never been a sloucher when it comes to accessibility, but there's so many exciting things in WWDC 2021 that really bring that point home for me.
Absolutely. Jason?
And in designing apps for accessibility, you'll find, at least I found, that it forces a kind of thinking that automatically smooths the whole rest of the process, which in and of itself is actually, a design tool. So it's not really a benefit. It might as well just be the right way to do it from the beginning.
All right. Another WWDC, almost to the end. We've been able to think through it. Think about it. This has been an interesting experiment, as far as covering it a little bit at the beginning, a little bit at the end. I want to thank Ari and Jason, Chris and Andy for joining us and hanging out with us a little bit and talking through this. I want to thank everyone watching who has been asking a lot of great questions. I have this whole theory that we don't have to have a big lineup for it. We just wait for people to talk about what they want, have us talk about what they want, like us to talk about. So it's a different kind of show. So it's been a grand experiment. So thanks to everyone, all the panelists here, and also all the viewers who made the show happen as our producers. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to close it up. We're going to jump back in. We have a bit of a watch party going on in office hours. We're going to all go back into that. But thank you so much for watching, and hopefully we'll do this again, maybe even every night starting next year. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.